I want to turn and talk to you about a speech. I'm going to guess many of you didn't even know it happened, but in California, Governor Newsom, the Democrat governor of California, gave his State of the State speech, kind of like when the president gives a State of the Union speech in Congress. Most states, maybe every state, but California has the governor give a State of the State presentation. So he spoke in the Capitol, and California, of course, has become radically left. And you can, by the way, if you want to hear this whole speech, you can go to our website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, under a list of links, you can click on and listen to the entire speech by Governor Newsom. I just want to tell you what I want to grab out of his speech and talk to you about today in terms of how starkly and just undeniably radically left the Democrat Party is today. What Gavin Newsom's topic was, he focused on homelessness and what the Democrat government of the state of California, so he's governor, he's Democrat, the entire Senate. I mean, there's no one in power, to summarize, no one in power in the state of California who's Republican. Zero. The state is utterly run by the Democrat Party. I'm going to have, and I should have mentioned when we started, by the way, Matt, the extremely wonderful producer, is out sick, and so we have a substitute producer today. Derek Kaufman's here, helping me out, and I really appreciate that, getting the show rolling. And so we're going to I want to play the clip, Derek, the wonderful, what Governor Newsom had to say in his State of the State speech about what California is going to do about homelessness. Here you go.
The state of California can no longer treat homelessness and housing insecurity as someone else's problem, buried below, other priorities that are much easier to win or better suited for sound bites. It's our responsibility, and it must be the top of our agenda. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. This year we have proposed CalAIM. It's a once-in-a-lifetime reform of our Medi-Cal system based on the obvious, long-ignored principle that physical health and brain health are inextricably linked. After all, 10 million Californians, 1 in 4 suffer from some type of behavioral health condition. This is not a narrow issue, nor a new one. The deeper truth is that our healthcare system, though, has been designed to treat some of our parts, not the sum of our parts. And that must change. This landmark proposal calls for leveraging Medi-Cal as a tool to help California's most vulnerable residents, the homeless, our children, and people cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. It's about integrating care, targeting social determinants of health, and expanding our whole-person care pilots statewide. Healthcare and housing can no longer be divorced. After all, what's more fundamental to a person's well-being than a roof over their head? Doctors should be able to write prescriptions for housing the same way they do for insulin and antibiotics. Why not? That's the aim of CalAIM, transforming our Medi-Cal system as we know it, and we backed it up with a $695 million budget request to make it real this year.
Friends, that is the scariest speech imaginable, and I want you to really think about what he is saying. This is not some goofball Occupy Wall Street person rambling away in some, homeless camp about how doctors ought to be able to prescribe a home as a prescription for someone who comes to see them. This is the governor of California, the arguably most or second most powerful Democrat governor in the country, maybe with Cuomo, the two of them, Cuomo. But these two, this guy, Gavin Newsom, is saying that the government ought to be able to permit a doctor to give a prescription. So it's necessary medication. That's what prescriptions are. Necessary medication, necessary care. A doctor ought to be able to prescribe a home for someone who comes in as his patient. You have to recognize how radical and how dangerous this idea is. Of course, on the surface, you say, well, gosh, they're homeless, so of course they need a home. That's the definition of homelessness. That's why they, that this would solve their homelessness, because then they would have a home. Understand, first of all, when you have a Democrat Party lurching forward at breakneck speed, trying to take complete control of the healthcare system in this country, complete control. When the Democrats tell you Medicare for all, they like that term because Medicare sounds nice. It sounds friendly. It sounds like they're caring about people. They're talking about complete governmental control over the entire healthcare system. So they have that in place, or if they were to get that in place. And then they say, look what doctors should be able to prescribe. Far beyond necessary antibiotics or insulin, they should be able to prescribe everything any person needs to make them whole. So, for example, a doctor could prescribe a home. How about transportation or a car? How about someone needs to have a better education? So a doctor could say, for their mental health, they need better education. And you have to understand, the power of the prescription means that the doctor, backed by this new Medicare for All program they want, the state will have not only the ability, but the duty, the responsibility to permit that prescription to be fulfilled. Other portions of this speech, he talked about the idea that we need to radically change our policy with respect to mental illness. And, you may know we had big changes in the American system dealing with mental illness a few years ago. And part of the change was we said that you could not involuntarily force an individual into mental health care unless he or she is a danger to himself or others. And the idea was, and it was partly done because people were recognizing it's very easy to make the accusation against a senior citizen, against a wealthy person, against someone you want to have locked up, to say, oh yeah, they have mental health problems. They really do. And so you end up with people incarcerated practically in the mental health system. And the idea of the reform was saying, if you're not, actually physically dangerous to yourself or others, we can't involuntarily lock you up. Governor Newsom saying, nah, we ought to be able to be a little more forceful. Just drag these people off the streets. Look, I'm the first to say we have a big homeless problem in this country. And it did not come because President Trump is president. He even acknowledged this in another portion of the speech. It's, both parties have been involved. There's been an evolving problem over the years. But we're at this point that homelessness is a problem in California. It's also aggressive homelessness. It's not just people living on the streets. It's people aggressively confronting law-abiding, hardworking, tax-paying citizens as they try to drive to work, as they walk the streets of the city, and be aggressive about demanding money, physically aggressive about demanding, I need food, I need this, I need that. And so we do have to deal with those problems. I think it's a little scary when you have a leftist governor and a leftist candidate for president, we'll talk about Bernie in a few minutes, urging this Medicare for all, this government control of the healthcare system, urging that people must be incarcerated in a mental institution. They wouldn't use incarcerated. They'd say, cared for, providing care they really need. But you're going to start letting them expand the definition of who gets to be locked up involuntarily. Scary idea. I think we have to address homelessness, but not in ways that have too much potential to infringe on the freedom of the individual. And I'll tell you the other, in fact, there was a great quote, I don't know if I'll find it in time, but Ronald Reagan or somebody had this idea or this point to make, that you have, socialism, which is really what Gavin Newsom is talking about. It's just socialism, taking care of everything for everybody. Socialism cannot prescribe, cannot take care of, cannot supply, cannot solve the problems that led to homelessness to start with. You think about the homeless population in California and everywhere in our country. We're talking about mental health problems. We're talking about drug addiction. We're talking about alcohol problems. We're talking about all sorts of problems that many of which the homelessness is a result of those problems. Some people are homeless because they had really down in the luck times, they had a hard situation in life and lost all their money and don't happen to have a family. They really are people like that too. But the idea of a government beginning to swoop up everyone they find troublesome in the homeless population, put them involuntarily into mental health institutions, is a very scary solution. And back to this idea of what government can and cannot do. Much of homelessness is due to people who lost their way in life. They become addicted, they become mentally ill, they have become hopeless, they become full of fear, and all that socialist solutions by big government people like Newsom can do is fix the problem. Maybe they can build enough housing. Maybe they can build enough mental health facilities. Maybe they can advance and fund enough care for people with addictions. But the real problems that lead to homelessness in a vast number of cases is the idea of you lost your sense of personal, individual sense of worth, of self-worth, of purpose, of the idea that you have a place in this world, and that comes from faith. That notion that reinstilling in the individual belief in himself, belief there's a higher power available and with you and able to help you through life and guide you through life. None of the emotional problems that can lead to homelessness are ever fixed by the physical solution the government can impose on you or provide for you, which is, incarceration in mental institution, drug and alcohol care, buying housing for people and just flooding people into homeless shelters. Socialism as a problem solver in the world cannot really solve the problems that truly come from a more personal sense of loss, a sense of identity, purpose, a sense of faith, a sense that there's a more in this world than just you all alone, that there actually is a creator among us who cares for us. The deeper solutions that lead to happiness and mental stability come from higher answers than socialist government simply providing more housing, more forced care, more forced incarceration in mental health institutions, or more care for your addiction problems or alcohol problems. But the idea, I want to go back to Governor Newsom and wrapping up this segment. If you picture what this guy is talking about, a massive increase in funding and focus in the mental health world in California to deal with homelessness, it gets us to 20 steps ahead in the George Orwell worry. We used to talk about Orwell in 1984 and how the government will control everything. He talks about correcting people whose thought is off. It's a scary, scary thought, and yet to him, the idea of fixing homelessness by having government-controlled health care, mandated, you can't get out of it, you can't ignore it, and then you have doctors with the ability to prescribe what he was saying, prescribe a home. A doctor should be able to prescribe a home for someone in the same way they can prescribe, I guess he used insulin or some kind of antibiotic. Doctors prescribing everything you need, doctors paid by the federal government, doctors controlled by the federal government, doctors deciding what everyone needs way beyond the physical health of the body, and doctors empowered because we're in their worldview, we'll get to Medicare for all, we'll get to government-controlled society. Doctors will be in charge of everything. And the idea that society can say, hey, wait a minute, why should we have to pay for a home for this person who isn't trying to improve his life, isn't trying to move forward in life, isn't trying to become capable of working, isn't trying to heal his problems, isn't trying anything. So instead we're going to say, instead of solving his problems, we're just going to have a doctor prescribe for him a home and the rest of society has to pay for it. These are, I don't even know if I'll probably have more discussion about this topic throughout this week and next week going forward. But Gavin Newsom, in his State of the State speech in California, really gave America a window on how radical and extreme and dangerous the American left is today. If you're going to have government-controlled health care, doctors controlled by government, and doctors can prescribe anything they think you need, and the rest, that would mean necessarily the taxpayers pay for it, we are way beyond the worst fears George Orwell ever had. We'll come back to him more, but that's the end of talking about him today. Gavin Newsom, I just think you ought to listen to his speech and recognize where these people would take us if only we would let them.